What happens when a millionaire's perfect romance story is shattered by secrets, lies, and a dangerous painting? As hidden truths unravel, love and loyalty are put to the ultimate test. Stay tuned to uncover the shocking twists that could change everything. Morning sunlight streamed through the large window, casting warm golden streaks across the polished wooden floor, tracing soft, fluid patterns like a living painting. The apartment, with its classic design, boasted high ceilings adorned with intricate moldings. The creamy white walls blended harmoniously with the dark wooden furniture and scattered pieces of art, each painting a small story waiting to be uncovered. Beside the armchair by the window stood a small bookshelf crammed with volumes on art and history, lending an air of quiet intellect to the space. At the center of the room, the dining table was draped in a linen cloth, bearing a simple yet elegant vase of white tulips. Soft jazz notes flowed from the speaker, their gentle rhythm intertwining with the cheerful chirping of birds from the nearby park. It was a tranquil scene, yet beneath the serenity lingered an unspoken tension, a faint and nameless unease poised on the brink of unraveling. The stillness was broken only by the measured clinking of Isabel's spoon against her teacup, her motions as delicate and composed as her demeanor, and the steady, purposeful sound of Maxwell's footsteps on the wooden floor, strong, deliberate, yet unobtrusive. Isabel stood at the kitchen counter, dressed in a simple cream-knit dress that exuded an effortless elegance. Her hand stirred a cup of chamomile tea, the rising steam carrying a gentle fragrance that filled the room. Her gaze flickered over the notebook lying open on the table, its pages revealing her neat, meticulous handwriting. Maxwell entered the room, holding 2 cups of coffee, his hair slightly tousled from a late night. The sleeves of his white shirt were rolled up to his elbows, striking a balance between casual ease and an understated allure. His footsteps were soft on the wooden floor, but they were enough for Isabel to sense his presence without looking up. Maxwell softly.
"You're up early. Didn't we spend hours last night talking about the exhibition?"
Isabel smiled, her expression softening as her eyes met Maxwell's. She set the notebook down and leaned slightly in his direction. Isabel smiling.
"I can't shake the feeling. There's something strange about the forgotten light."
Maxwell's brow furrowed slightly as he placed one of the coffee cups on the table and moved toward the window. He stood there for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the scattered documents on the dining table. The morning light streaming through the window illuminated the sharp contours of his face, but there was a shadow in his eyes, a flicker of some deeply held thought he wasn't ready to share. Maxwell stood silently by the large window, where the soft morning light filtered through the sheer curtains, casting shimmering patterns onto the polished wooden floor. The porcelain coffee cup in his hand tilted slightly, releasing a thin wisp of steam from the dark liquid inside, its aroma a bittersweet mix of warmth and bitterness. His long, slender fingers gripped the cup's edge lightly, seeking comfort in its fragile warmth amidst the unnerving stillness of the room. His eyes drifted lazily to the cobblestone street below, but his thoughts wandered far beyond the boundaries of the present, to places neither seen nor spoken. Outside, under the golden morning sun, a few passers-by strolled leisurely along the sidewalk. Their unhurried pace stood in sharp contrast to the weighty thoughts occupying Maxwell's mind, thoughts he couldn't articulate, not even to the woman closest to him. Maxwell calm, trying to sound nonchalant.
"Wasn't that the highlight of the exhibit? Is something wrong, Isabel?"
His question, though gentle on the surface, carried a subtle undertone of concern, as if he had already sensed something off in her demeanor. Isabel, still by the kitchen counter, didn't answer immediately. Her fingers brushed over the cover of a notebook resting on the table, its pages filled with her carefully handwritten notes. She traced the smooth surface of the paper absent-mindedly, as if searching for clarity within the words she had so meticulously penned. Yet her eyes, unfocused and distant, betrayed her growing unease. Isabel soft, hesitant.
"I'm not sure, maybe. It's just a feeling, but I'll take another look later."
She paused briefly, her gaze shifting toward Maxwell before she added, her tone deliberately evasive.
By the way, don't forget, we have Veronica's party tonight.
The moment the name Veronica left her lips, the atmosphere in the room seemed to shift. Maxwell hesitated, his expression changing ever so slightly, a flicker of something too fleeting to pinpoint, yet unmistakable. His eyes dropped briefly, his brows knitting in a subtle furrow, as if the name had stirred an old memory he had tried hard to bury. His grip on the coffee cup tightened, his fingers gliding over the cold porcelain, as though trying to suppress something unspoken. After a brief moment of silence, he turned abruptly, moving toward the dining table with an urgency that felt out of place. Maxwell set the coffee cup down on the polished wood surface with a touch more force than necessary, the sharp clink breaking through the room's fragile quiet, leaving only the faint jazz playing from a nearby speaker to fill the void. Maxwell low, steady, masking his emotions.
I remember.
The silence that followed was heavy, not the kind that brought comfort, but one laced with an unspoken tension, a thin veil of unease that neither of them could ignore. Isabel, still standing by the kitchen counter, felt the shift in Maxwell's demeanor acutely. She looked up, her eyes studying him intently, yet she chose not to press further. Her hand unconsciously tightened around the notebook's edge, as though seeking answers in the smooth texture of its cover. Maxwell, aware of her gaze, paused momentarily. But instead of meeting her eyes, he quietly pulled out a chair and sat down. He lifted the coffee cup once more, sipping slowly, his movements deliberate but mechanical. His gaze, however, remained distant, lost in a labyrinth of thoughts he couldn't bring himself to voice. Isabel low, tinged with quiet challenge.
Maxwell, there's something you're not telling me, isn't there?
Maxwell glanced up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face at her sudden question. But just as quickly, he shook his head, as if brushing away her concerns and the growing tension in the air. Maxwell forcing a steady tone.
There's nothing, Isabel. Don't worry. Tonight, let's just enjoy the party, okay?
But to Isabel, his reassurance felt more like confirmation of the opposite. She sighed softly, her eyes drifting away from him to the notebook on the table, its quiet presence offering no answers to the questions swirling in her heart. In the stillness that followed, the soft jazz continued to play, its melodies weaving through the room like a quiet observer to the unspoken emotions between them, tensions too delicate to name, yet impossible to ignore. Maxwell gently slid open the large glass door leading to the balcony, the soft sound of the rollers breaking the stillness of the room. Stepping outside, he was immediately greeted by the tender warmth of the spring morning sun, its pale golden light brushing against his face. The brightness stood in stark contrast to the brooding expression etched onto his strong yet somber features. Leaning lightly against the intricately wrought iron railing, Maxwell crossed his arms over his chest, his gaze fixed on the street below. The cobblestones, still glistening from last night's rain, reflected the sunlight in a muted brilliance. A few passers-by strolled with unhurried steps, their ease a striking counterpoint to the turmoil brewing in Maxwell's mind. His brows knitted slightly, a subtle signal of the weighty deliberation or hesitation over a decision that he himself hadn't fully come to terms with. The radiant spring morning seemed to drape the world in a tranquil beauty, as if nature sought to soothe the air with its clarity and brightness. Yet even the sun's gentle warmth could not dispel the shadow of unease flickering in Maxwell's eyes, an expression layered with unanswered questions and the burden of truths he hadn't yet summoned the courage to voice. After a few moments of quiet stillness, Maxwell returned to the dining table. He offered Isabel a faint, strained smile, an attempt at appearing at ease that failed to mask the tension simmering beneath. Isabel looked at him, sensing something amiss, but chose not to ask. Within Maxwell, unanswered questions churned relentlessly, like hidden waves crashing against a rocky shore, their rhythm unyielding and impossible to ignore. Maxwell sat at the table, running a hand through his slightly disheveled hair, a familiar habit when he was trying to steady himself. Isabel continued sipping her tea, her gaze occasionally flickering toward him. Yet neither spoke, neither daring to break the fragile silence that hung between them. The day dragged on slowly, and though Maxwell maintained a composed exterior, his thoughts were consumed by the evening ahead. Veronica, the name stirred memories he longed to bury, ties he wished he could sever completely. As the clock neared 8, the sunlight faded, giving way to the dim glow of streetlights illuminating the cobblestone streets. Maxwell and Isabel prepared for the party. He donned a dark, impeccably tailored suit, though the tension in his eyes betrayed the turmoil he couldn't conceal. Isabel, elegant in a deep sapphire gown, noticed his unease but offered no comment. Instead, she rested her hand lightly on his, a silent gesture of reassurance. The car glided along winding roads, finally coming to a halt before Veronica's estate, a stately, timeless mansion perched quietly on a hill, surrounded by towering oaks and a meticulously manicured garden. Crossing the grand threshold, they were greeted by the dazzling light of a massive crystal chandelier, its golden glow doing little to dispel the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to linger within. Maxwell and Isabel stepped through the mansion's grand entrance, their presence an understated harmony of refinement. Isabel's gown, a pearly satin masterpiece, shimmered faintly in the light streaming through the towering windows, lending her an ethereal yet regal aura. The dress, minimalist yet exquisitely crafted, hugged her slender frame, leaving her shoulders bare in a design that exuded quiet sophistication. Her hair was swept into a loose updo, with delicate strands framing her face, accentuating the poise and quiet confidence in her expression. Her hand rested lightly in Maxwell's, an unspoken anchor to his composed yet uneasy demeanor. He wore a classic black tuxedo, its sharp tailoring accentuating his tall, commanding presence. The black bow tie against his crisp white shirt evoked a timeless elegance, perfectly complementing his natural air of authority. Though his steps were steady and his grip on Isabel's hand reassuring, Maxwell's eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. The deep, confident gaze that usually defined him now held a glint of apprehension, as if each step deeper into the mansion brought him closer to something he had tried desperately to. Descending the grand staircase into the opulent living room, bathed in the radiant golden glow of a crystal chandelier, Veronica appeared, commanding the attention of everyone in the already extravagant and dazzling space. She wore a striking red gown, its design hugging the flawless curves of her figure, while the long flowing train swept gracefully across the polished marble steps. Every movement she made was deliberate, each step slow and fluid, emphasizing her innate confidence and commanding presence. The satin fabric shimmered under the cascading light of the chandelier, making her appear like a living flame, burning brighter than anyone else in the room. Veronica's presence was a force, an air of authority that swept through the gathering. Curious, admiring glances turned toward her immediately, while a flicker of envy gleamed in the eyes of some of the attending ladies. But Veronica, with her poised demeanor and razor-sharp focus, seemed utterly indifferent to the attention. Her piercing gaze swept the room, like a predator searching for its prey, until her eyes landed squarely on Maxwell. A slow, calculated smile tugged at her perfectly painted crimson lips, a smile that was neither warm nor casual but carried a hint of triumph, as though she had found precisely what she was looking for. Her eyes gleamed with an unspoken challenge, one that only Maxwell seemed to understand. Veronica began to walk toward Maxwell and Isabel, the sharp sound of her crimson heels echoing softly but deliberately on the marble floor. The lively hum of laughter and classical music seemed to fade as she approached, as if the room itself shrank beneath the weight of her magnetism. When she reached them, Veronica extended her hand with a decisive motion friendly on the surface, yet laced with an unspoken dominance. Veronica.
Maxwell, it's been too long.
Maxwell hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting briefly to Isabel before he reached out to take Veronica's hand. Yet the handshake was anything but simple. Veronica's grip tightened just enough to make a statement, a subtle assertion of control that Maxwell could not ignore. Before Maxwell could react, Veronica seized his wrist with a casual yet firm authority and guided him toward a secluded corner near a grand, intricately carved column, away from the bustling crowd. Isabel remained where she was, a flicker of confusion in her eyes. She didn't follow, but her sharp gaze stayed locked on Veronica, shifting quickly from surprise to suspicion, as though she could sense the unease permeating the encounter. In the dimly lit corner, where the chandelier's light cast fragmented shadows across Veronica's face, she turned to Maxwell, her smile still impeccable but edged with danger. Veronica in a whisper, her voice soft but cutting.
You do realize the forgotten light isn't just another piece of art, don't you? There are people, Maxwell, who won't sit idly by if the truth about it comes to light.
Maxwell's hand clenched instinctively, his gaze hardening, though he maintained a calm exterior. Maxwell.
What do you want, Veronica? Speak plainly.
Veronica smiling, her eyes glinting with victory.
Just a gentle reminder, Maxwell. I still hold certain pieces that could hurt you and the people you care about. Don't make me use them.
Her words hung in the air, sharp and heavy. Without waiting for a reply, Veronica turned on her heel, her flawless smile unwavering, yet her cold eyes cut like a blade, leaving a palpable unease in her wake. She walked away with measured confidence, as if their exchange had been nothing more than an amusing diversion. Maxwell remained frozen for a moment, his gaze fixed on her retreating figure, while his mind reeled with the implications of her words. They echoed in his head like a direct threat, amplifying the anxieties already clawing at his thoughts. He inhaled deeply, steadying himself, before heading back to Isabel. But even as he attempted to mask his turmoil, the tension etched on his face was impossible to completely hide. From across the room, Isabel watched intently, her gaze fixed on Maxwell and Veronica as they stood together in the shadowed corner at the far end of the hall. She couldn't hear the full conversation from that distance, but stray words, truth, threat, harm floated back to her, stirring unease deep within her. Her fingers unconsciously tightened around the fabric of her dress, but she quickly drew in a deep breath, regaining her composure. With deliberate yet confident steps, Isabel approached. The soft sound of her heels on the marble floor echoed evenly, a rhythm as steady as her resolve. The closer she got, the more she noticed the tension in Maxwell's posture, the dangerous satisfaction in Veronica's smile. When Isabel finally reached them, she stopped beside Maxwell, her sharp gaze flicking between him and Veronica. She didn't need to guess to know that the conversation had been anything but a simple matter of business. Isabel gently, but with an edge that cut through the charged atmosphere.
What are you two talking about?
The question wasn't loud, but every syllable carried a quiet sharpness. Maxwell startled, his eyes darting to Isabel for a fleeting moment before dropping to the floor, as if searching for the right words. Veronica, on the other hand, turned smoothly, her perfect smile unchanged, her expression not one of surprise but of subtle amusement at Isabel's arrival. Veronica smiling, her tone sweet but icy.
Oh, just business, Isabel. We used to be partners, remember?
She lingered on the word partners with pointed emphasis, as if inviting Isabel to fill in the unspoken blanks. Isabel held her ground, her face calm and unreadable, but her piercing gaze bore into Veronica like a blade. Isabel smiling faintly, her eyes never leaving Veronica.
Really? What kind of business needs such a private discussion?
Her voice remained soft, almost pleasant, but the firmness behind her words was unmistakable. Veronica tilted her head slightly, as if intrigued by Isabel's persistence. She shrugged, the movement graceful, her red gown catching the chandelier's light, as if amplifying her presence. Veronica.
Oh, just something about the forgotten light. Such a fascinating piece, isn't it? I simply wanted to ensure it's displayed appropriately.
Each word from Veronica felt like a veiled strike not directed at Isabel, but at Maxwell. Isabel could feel the underlying tension in every syllable, but she refused to let it show. Her smile remained serene and composed, though her eyes turned colder. Isabel.
I see, but I trust Maxwell will handle whatever needs handling, won't you?
Her gaze turned briefly to Maxwell, her words both an affirmation and a challenge. Maxwell looked up at her, his eyes filled with a storm of conflicting emotions: guilt, unease, and a trace of something softer, almost apologetic. He knew she was waiting for him to speak, but no words came. Veronica let out a quiet, knowing laugh, her eyes gleaming with satisfaction. Veronica.
Of course. Maxwell always does an excellent job. Now, if you'll excuse me, there are other guests waiting for me.
With that, she turned, the long train of her scarlet gown sweeping across the floor like a flame trailing behind her. She moved with the confident grace of someone who had won the game, leaving behind an oppressive silence in her wake. Maxwell and Isabel remained where they were, neither speaking for a moment. Isabel, still wearing her faint smile, now turned her gaze fully on Maxwell. Her look wasn't accusing, nor was it angry. It was probing, unyielding, like a scalpel slicing cleanly through his defenses. As Veronica disappeared into the crowd, her poise radiating victory, Isabel stayed rooted in place, an icy sense of dread settling over her. She didn't need Maxwell to say it, she could feel it in the air between them. There was something he wasn't telling her, and his silence only deepened the creeping suspicion rising within her. Maxwell shifted uneasily, as though caught between the urge to walk away and the need to speak. But Isabel's unwavering gaze held him firmly in place. She didn't need to say anything more. Her look alone carried all the questions she wanted to ask, cutting through his defenses like a blade. As Veronica disappeared into the crowd, Isabel remained where she stood, her piercing eyes locked on Maxwell. She waited, silently demanding an explanation. But all he could offer was a quiet sigh, his shoulders sagging under an invisible weight, as if the burden of the world had settled squarely on him. Without hesitation, Isabel fixed her determined gaze on Maxwell before gently but firmly taking his hand. She led him away from the laughter, chatter, and dazzling lights of the party. They moved toward a secluded corner of the room, where the brilliance of the massive crystal chandelier softened into faint, indifferent rays that barely illuminated the polished marble floor and walls. The space around them grew unnervingly quiet, as though the noise of the outside world had been muted the moment they stepped into that shadowed enclave. Isabel stopped and turned to face Maxwell, her eyes locking onto his with unflinching intensity. The sharpness in her gaze carried a weight that made Maxwell falter, her eyes probing for the truth she already suspected he was hiding. It was a look that cut through the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself, demanding answers. Isabel, low but firm, each word deliberate.
What's going on that you're not telling me?
Maxwell didn't respond immediately. He let out a heavy sigh, a sound that seemed to echo the burden her question had placed on his already strained shoulders. For a moment, his tall frame seemed to shrink, his strong presence diminished under the weight of something he could no longer ignore. He avoided Isabel's penetrating stare, his gaze falling instead to the marble floor beneath their feet. The faint light from the chandelier above reflected on the intricate veins of the stone, but to Maxwell, it was all a blur. Maxwell, his voice low, steady but strained.
It's nothing serious. Veronica, she just hasn't given up her old games.
He looked up briefly, his eyes brushing against Isabel's for the briefest of moments before darting away again, as though afraid of what he might see in her expression. His explanation, though carefully spoken, rang hollow, more like a fragile screen hastily erected to block her suspicions than a genuine attempt to reassure her. Isabel narrowed her eyes, her brows knitting in doubt. Her lips pressed into a thin, straight line, a small but telling gesture of disappointment she tried to suppress. Yet she refused to look away, her piercing gaze relentless. It wasn't just questioning, it was a challenge, a silent demand that Maxwell confront whatever he was withholding. Isabel cold, succinct, her words weighted with conviction.
"I don't believe you."
The moment stretched, heavy and seemingly endless. Isabel stood tall, her posture unyielding, as if she were fortifying herself against the growing chasm of mistrust and frustration widening between them. Maxwell, in contrast, lowered his head slightly, his hands falling limply at his sides in a silent gesture of surrender. He offered no further defense, and it was his silence more than any excuse he might have spoken that drove the wedge between them even deeper. Amid the distant laughter and clinking glasses from the heart of the party, accompanied by the faint strains of a piano drifting through the air, the space between Maxwell and Isabel remained oppressively still. The world around them seemed distant, irrelevant, as though it no longer existed. Inside that silence, the unspoken grew louder, Isabel's mounting doubts, the unanswered questions Maxwell avoided, and the tension that now stood as a towering, invisible wall between them. Each moment that passed widened the gap, leaving them stranded on opposite sides of something neither could yet define but both could undeniably feel. Maxwell turned away, his eyes scanning the crowd in the grand ballroom, where guests were still engrossed in lively conversation, laughter, and the clinking of glasses raised in celebration. Yet, his gaze didn't align with the room's jubilant atmosphere. Despite his efforts to maintain composure, the turmoil brewing in his mind bled through, his eyes betraying the calm facade. Isabel's words echoed in his head, sharp, weighty, and impossible to ignore, leaving him unable to grasp even a moment's peace. Behind him, Isabel stood motionless, making no move to follow. Her hands gripped the stem of her wine glass so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She didn't take another sip, her focus entirely fixed on one person, Veronica. Not far away, Veronica was radiant, smiling brightly, as though nothing had happened, her graceful gestures captivating the group of guests around her. To the casual observer, she was the epitome of charm, but to Isabel, every movement Veronica made radiated an undercurrent of danger. Isabel's gaze darkened not with sudden anger, but with an ever-deepening suspicion she couldn't quell. She exhaled a long breath, but it did nothing to ease the knot tightening in her chest. Without a word, Isabel turned and walked toward the balcony doors. She pushed the glass door open gently, letting the crisp night air rush in, carrying with it a faint chill. Stepping outside, she placed her hands on the wrought iron railing, her eyes settling on the quiet garden below. The meticulously trimmed hedges and orderly rows of trees stood motionless, their stillness broken only by the occasional flutter of leaves in a passing breeze. The wind caught her hair, lifting the soft strands and letting them dance lightly around her face. The chill brushing against her skin made her shiver, but she didn't look away from the scene below. The silence of the garden, serene as it was, failed to bring her solace. Instead, the unease within her grew stronger, an unrelenting storm brewing just beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. The faint strains of classical music drifted through the open door, the gentle piano notes threading into the night air. But Isabel barely noticed them. All she could hear was the whisper of her own doubts and the rising tide of unease surging within her. The wind brushed softly through Isabel's hair as she stood on the balcony, carrying the chill of the night, a quiet reminder that time was slipping away, yet the doubts lingering in her heart refused to dissipate. Her gaze shifted from the stillness of the garden below back to the golden glow spilling out from the ballroom behind her. Though the evening unfolded with feigned smiles and veiled words, Isabel knew she needed clearer answers, and she would have to find them herself. Across the room, a large window stretched across one wall, offering a view of the bustling street outside. The glow of streetlights, headlights, and shop fronts painted a vivid tableau that starkly contrasted with the quiet intensity inside the room. The occasional sound of hurried footsteps and distant laughter filtered faintly through the thick glass, but wasn't enough to break Isabel's deep focus. Seated at her desk, Isabel's posture was poised yet taut. She wore a simple white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows, revealing delicate but resolute wrists. Her movements were deliberate and precise as she flipped through the documents spread before her. Lines of text, graphs, and images related to the forgotten light passed under her scrutinizing gaze, though not all of them brought satisfaction. Her expression sharpened as she stumbled upon something unusual. The lines of her face shifted from focus to tense, then to one of surprise. Her fingers froze on a page, hovering over a logo printed on the corner, a familiar symbol she hadn't expected to see, the emblem of Argent Holdings. The scene outside the window remained lively, the unending hum of the city unfolding like a restless heartbeat, but Isabel no longer noticed it. She leaned back in her chair, her eyes wide with a mix of bewilderment and the faint glimmer of realization. It was as if the scattered pieces she'd been collecting had finally begun to fit together, revealing a larger picture she had never seen before. Her hand lingered on the page bearing the logo of Argent Holdings, her eyes widening as the fragments in her mind slowly aligned. Layer by layer, the secrets she had been chasing seemed to unravel before her, each revelation peeling back another veil of mystery. Isabel sat motionless at her desk, the soft glow of an antique lamp casting light across the document she held in her hands. Her eyes were fixed on the words and numbers printed on the page, each line and figure standing out like a grim verdict. Her fingers clenched the edges of the paper tightly, her knuckles white, as if the torrent of emotions building within her could only manifest through that single gesture. Her expression was a storm of shock and anger, her brows furrowed as she read and reread the unmistakable text. Ryan, his name appeared more than once in the document. But what chilled her more was the mention of Argent Holdings, tied to transactions Maxwell had never spoken of, and a vague but ominous note implicating Veronica. With a sharp motion, Isabel set the document down on the desk, the sound of paper hitting wood breaking the stillness of the room. Her hand trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the fury simmering just beneath the surface. Refusing to let herself be consumed by emotion, she grabbed her phone, her fingers moving purposefully across the screen as she dialed Maxwell's number. Isabel over the phone, her voice stern, almost cold.
Maxwell, I've just found something. You need to come here now.
On the other end, Maxwell's voice came through, hesitant, as though he could sense the tension in Isabel's tone. Maxwell hesitant.
What is it?
Standing now, Isabel kept her phone pressed to her ear, her eyes locked on the document, as if staring at it long enough would unravel all the answers she sought. Isabel firm, concise.
It's about Ryan and maybe Veronica.
She didn't wait for Maxwell to respond, ending the call abruptly. She knew he wouldn't hesitate, he'd have no choice but to come immediately. Isabel set the phone down and stared at the document, her gaze steely with an unrelenting resolve. Picking it up again, she scanned the lines, charts, and annotations, each detail taking on a weightier significance, the pieces beginning to connect into a picture she had never clearly seen before. The quiet of the room remained undisturbed, save for the soft sound of Isabel's footsteps as she moved around the desk. But the atmosphere had shifted tense, charged with foreboding, as though Isabel stood on the brink of a revelation that could change everything. Outside the window, the glow of streetlights and the steady flow of traffic created a stark contrast to the oppressive stillness inside. Isabel took a deep breath, her hand trembling slightly as she placed the document back on the desk. Her eyes remained fixed on it, as though determined to strip away every hidden layer and uncover the truth within. Isabel ended the call, her gaze sharp with determination as she stared at the document, resolute in her mission to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The hurried sound of footsteps echoed through the long, silent hallway of the museum, Maxwell's shoes striking the polished floor with a force that shattered the usual calm. When he pushed open the door to Isabel's office, it creaked low and heavy, revealing a warm yet stifling space bathed in the soft, golden glow of an antique desk lamp. Maxwell strode in, his face etched with tension, the deep lines on his brow more pronounced under the weight of his heavy thoughts. His eyes swept the room briefly before landing on the document lying neatly on Isabel's desk. One glance was enough. He recognized it instantly, and his breath caught for a fleeting moment. It was the last thing he had wanted Isabel to uncover. Behind the desk, Isabel stood poised, her demeanor calm, yet her eyes betrayed something far colder. The lamplight cast shadows across her face, accentuating the determination and steely resolve in her gaze. She didn't need to say a word. Instead, she picked up the document with measured precision. Each step she took toward Maxwell was deliberate, every motion calculated. She held the document out to him, her slim but firm fingers gripping the edge of the paper. Her piercing eyes locked onto Maxwell's, unrelenting, demanding answers she had waited far too long to hear. Isabel, her voice cold, laden with accusation.
Did you know about this? Argent Holdings is tied to the painting and the exhibition. What did Ryan leave behind here that you haven't told me?
Maxwell hesitated before taking the document, his movements slow and uncertain, as though he were trying to delay the inevitable. His eyes dropped to the page, and for a brief moment, the words leapt out at him. Ryan, Argent Holdings, and the damning details linked to them burned into his mind like indelible ink. His hand tightened around the paper, but his shoulders sagged under the weight of it all. Though he stood before Isabel, he couldn't bring himself to meet her gaze. His eyes darted downward, settling on the polished stone floor, where the lamp's faint glow cast soft, uneven patterns. For a long moment, Maxwell said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive, as though he were sifting through the wreckage of his thoughts, struggling to find the right words. But the longer he hesitated, the thicker the tension grew, filling the small office with an unbearable weight. Maxwell remained silent for a moment, his eyes skimming the document before dropping to the floor. He couldn't bear to meet Isabel's fiery, questioning stare, guilt etched into every hesitant movement he made. Maxwell held the document tightly in his hands, his eyes scanning each line, as if the words were not just data but a crushing reminder of everything he had tried to hide or avoid. The text weighed on him like the burden of an entire world, forcing him to confront choices he knew would hurt Isabel if she uncovered them. After a long, heavy silence, he slowly placed the paper back on the wooden desk with deliberate care, his movements almost unnaturally measured. It was as though any sudden action might shatter the fragile bond between him and Isabel. He raised a hand to his temple, rubbing it with visible exhaustion. His long fingers moved slowly, attempting to soothe the pressure building in his mind. In that moment, Maxwell was no longer the strong, decisive man who always seemed in control. Instead, he appeared like someone buckling under the weight of responsibilities and secrets he had carried for far too long, burdens that were beginning to break him. Maxwell, his voice low, heavy with guilt, each word spoken deliberately.
I suspected for a while, but I wasn't sure, and I thought I could handle it before you found out.
His words hung in the air, cutting through the tense quiet of the room. But rather than easing the tension, they only made it worse. Isabel stiffened at the sound of his confession. She folded her arms tightly across her chest, a gesture that was both protective and a clear expression of her disappointment and resolve. Her eyes flared with anger, though beneath it lay a deeper hurt, one harder to articulate. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and her breaths came shorter, sharper, as though she was struggling to keep her emotions in check, but failing. Isabel, her voice raised slightly, trembling with anger.
Your secrets, don't you understand that I want to stand by you? You can't keep trying to handle everything on your own.
Her words landed like a hammer, shattering the already fragile atmosphere. Maxwell flinched, instinctively taking a small step back, a reflex of someone feeling cornered. The confidence and authority that usually defined him had evaporated, replaced by a reluctance to meet Isabel's piercing gaze. Maxwell, his voice soft, almost a whisper, filled with remorse.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to protect you.
Isabel let out a bitter laugh, the sound devoid of any humor. It was sharp, cold, and dripping with cynicism, a stark rebuttal to the excuse she had heard too many times before. Isabel, her voice cutting, each word a blade.
Protect me by shutting me out of every important decision, by leaving me to discover everything by...
Maxwell didn't respond immediately. He stood motionless for several moments, his eyes fixed on the floor, as though he could avoid the weight of her gaze. His hands twitched slightly, as if trying to form an explanation, but they fell limply to his sides, the futility of words overtaking him. The room felt stifling. The soft light from the antique lamp, which usually added warmth, now only highlighted the oppressive tension between them. Isabel turned abruptly, walking toward the large window at the far end of the room. She gazed out, but the vibrant lights of the bustling streets and the steady flow of traffic below failed to capture her attention. She exhaled a long breath, but there was no relief in it. Isabel stood tall, her posture radiating resolve, as though she had made up her mind not to let Maxwell's silence deter her from uncovering the truth. Maxwell remained frozen in the center of the room, the distance between him and Isabel growing larger with each passing second. It wasn't a physical gap, but an emotional chasm, carved by broken trust and unanswered questions. The steady ticking of the wall clock echoed through the room, each tick a cold reminder that time was slipping away, carrying with it the chance for reconciliation. The air in the room grew heavier, the ticking of the clock emphasizing the widening gulf between Maxwell and Isabel, a gulf too vast for truth or apologies to bridge. Isabel turned away, her shoulders rigid, as though her entire body were bracing itself against the invisible weight of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Her hands, trembling slightly now, rested on the polished edge of the desk, her fingers gripping it tightly, as if seeking some anchor in the oppressive stillness of the room. Her gaze fixed on the large window ahead, where the distant glow of streetlights and passing car beams blurred together, casting faint, fragmented reflections across the glass. But even as her eyes faced the night, Isabel wasn't truly seeing anything. Instead, her thoughts seemed to pierce through the darkness, searching desperately for the calm she knew she couldn't find. The room, already cloaked in the muted light of the antique desk lamp, felt even more suffocating now, the silence pressing in like a tangible force. The rhythmic ticking of the wall clock echoed in the stillness, each tick emphasizing the unspoken tension between the two people trapped in their own storm of emotions. Maxwell stood a short distance behind Isabel, yet the space between them felt vast, an unbridgeable chasm carved by guilt, anger, and unsaid words. His eyes, heavy with remorse, lingered on Isabel's back, a figure both fragile and unyielding in its quiet strength. Maxwell took a step forward, the soft sound of his shoes against the wooden floor breaking the silence but carrying the weight of hesitation. Each step was slow, deliberate, as though he were being held back by the crushing weight of his own conflict. He wanted to say something, to shatter the oppressive quiet between them, but the words caught in his throat, tangled by fear and doubt. He stopped short, his gaze fixed on Isabel, yet the silence he carried only built the wall between them higher. Isabel remained still, her posture upright but rigid, her body betraying no movement save for the steady, heavy rise and fall of her breath. Each breath seemed a Herculean effort to contain the storm of anger and disappointment roiling within her. The room itself felt frozen, the air thick with tension. Only the faint sounds from outside, the soft whistle of the wind brushing against the window and the relentless ticking of the clock broke the stillness, a haunting rhythm repeating endlessly in the background. After what felt like an eternity, Isabel finally broke the silence. Her voice, though soft, carried a resolute weight, each word carefully measured and deeply felt. Isabel, quiet but firm, her tone cutting through the stillness.
If we don't face this together, everything will fall apart.
Her words were more than a warning, they were a plea, a declaration that she couldn't and wouldn't continue to shoulder the burden alone. Though her voice was low, its meaning reverberated in the air, undeniable and unyielding. Maxwell remained still for a long moment, his eyes never leaving Isabel's back. Slowly, he nodded, the motion almost imperceptible, as though even this small gesture carried the weight of reluctant acknowledgement. His gaze held a quiet empathy, tinged with the unmistakable shadow of fear. While he agreed with Isabel's statement, the looming dread of what lay ahead gripped him tightly, a silent tide of anxiety rising within him, threatening to drown everything they had fought to preserve. Maxwell nodded slowly, his eyes reflecting both understanding and trepidation, yet inside, the waves of unease continued to swell relentless, unseen, and ready to engulf everything in their path. The light from the antique desk lamp in Isabel's office seemed to grow dimmer, its glow faltering under the weight of the tension that still hung thickly in the air. Maxwell, despite having nodded in agreement, felt no sense of relief. His silence was a tacit acknowledgement that the storm was far from over, and what lay ahead could be even more daunting than what they had just faced. Isabel, without turning to look at him, breathed steadily, her composure signaling that she was ready for whatever came next. Hours later, as night enveloped the city, Isabel left the museum, her mind heavy with unanswered questions. The hum of passing cars merged with the chill of the evening wind, brushing against her skin as her phone buzzed in her pocket. She glanced at the screen to see a succinct message from Veronica.
Meet me at the Lantern, 9 p.m.
Stepping into a quiet alley, Isabel saw the soft glow of vintage hanging lamps spilling from a small window, the unmistakable marker of the Lantern Cafe. Inside, warm golden light cascaded over dark wooden tables, creating an ambience that was both inviting and laced with mystery. The cafe, tucked away in the shadowed corner of the alley, was a world apart from the bustling streets outside. The heavy wooden door opened into a cozy yet enigmatic space, where the flicker of dim streetlights outside contrasted with the inviting glow of antique chandeliers within. The warm, golden light illuminated the weathered leather chairs and dark stained tables, wrapping the room in an air of intimacy touched with suspense. Exposed brick walls bore hand-painted artwork interspersed with small shelves holding books and lush green plants. Soft jazz played from an old speaker, mingling with the gentle clink of coffee cups on porcelain saucers. The rich aroma of espresso blended with a faint hint of caramel wafting from the dessert counter, adding a layer of comfort to an atmosphere that couldn't fully shake its undercurrent of tension. In the far corner of the cafe, near a large window overlooking the empty alley, Veronica sat waiting. A sleek black leather chair enveloped her slender frame, and her long, elegant black coat draped over the chair's back. Her chestnut hair, smooth and glossy, was tied back in a low knot, accentuating her sharp, confident features. A faint smile played on her lips, not overt, but calculated, exuding her trademark air of mystery. In front of her sat a cappuccino, its foam a picture of perfection, though she seemed entirely uninterested in it. Instead, her sharp eyes, gleaming with a deliberate focus, were fixed intently on the cafe's entrance. The heavy wooden door creaked open, and Isabel stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the floor, the sound echoing faintly in the quiet room. She wore a simple yet elegant cream trench coat, its clean lines highlighting her poised and commanding presence. Her hair was pulled back neatly, her strides purposeful and measured, as though she were stepping onto a battlefield for which she had long prepared. As the light from the chandeliers fell on Isabel, it illuminated her sharp, determined eyes. Her face remained composed, giving away nothing, but her gaze cut through the room like a blade, locking instantly on Veronica. In stark contrast, Veronica's calm demeanor betrayed no alarm. Her confidence was a shield, her every move exuding calculated control. Isabel approached the table where Veronica waited. The space around them seemed to contract, pulling tighter as the two women faced each other. The dim light from the hanging lamp above cast a muted glow over them, accentuating the icy confidence etched into Veronica's features and the unyielding determination that radiated from Isabel's stern expression. Veronica leaned back slightly in the black leather chair, Her shoulders relaxed in an almost casual manner, but the sharp intensity of her gaze was anything but. Her cold, calculating eyes remained fixed on Isabel, scrutinizing every detail, every subtle reaction, as though unwilling to miss even the faintest flicker of emotion. Her slender fingers, with neatly trimmed nails, slowly traced the rim of her cappuccino cup. The motion, while simple, carried a deliberate quality, as if she were meticulously weighing each word she was about to say, ensuring that her next statement would strike with the precision of a psychological blow. The dim light from the vintage lamp above cast an interplay of shadows across Veronica's face, accentuating her chiseled features while cloaking her in an enigmatic, almost menacing allure. Her glossy brown hair was tied back neatly, exposing a proud, elegant neck that only added to her air of confidence. She lifted the cup, her eyes never leaving Isabel, and took a small, deliberate sip. The slow, measured gesture seemed less about the drink and more about relishing the tension building between them. When she placed the porcelain cup back on the table, she did so with a peculiar care, leaving behind a faint smudge of red lipstick against the pristine white foam. Tilting her head slightly, Veronica allowed a faint smile to touch her lips. The expression was subtle, almost indifferent, yet it carried an unmistakable undertone, part challenge, part intrigue, as if testing how Isabel would respond to the inevitable. Veronica, her voice soft, laced with implication, each word calculated.
I think you're smart enough to know that Maxwell isn't entirely innocent. Ryan left behind things no one dared to touch. But now, it's shown up in your exhibit.
The words sliced through the air like a knife, but Isabel betrayed no visible reaction. Sitting upright, her posture exuded an unyielding composure. Her expression remained cool and controlled, her focus unwavering as she stared at Veronica, as though attempting to pierce through the polished veneer the woman across from her so carefully maintained. Beneath the table, Isabel's hands clenched tightly, her knuckles turning pale. But just as quickly, she forced herself to relax, unwilling to let even this small slip reveal any vulnerability. Her nails pressed into her palms, the slight sting serving as a grounding reminder to stay in control. Isabel, her tone steady, with an edge of unmistakable authority.
What do you want?
Veronica raised a single eyebrow, clearly pleased by Isabel's directness. The subtle arch of her brow, combined with her faint, sardonic smile, created an expression that was part mockery, part assessment. She leaned forward slowly, resting her forearms lightly on the table, as though closing the physical distance would make her words land with even greater impact. When Veronica spoke again, her voice was no longer light. It dropped into a deeper, more deliberate cadence, each word weighted with the unmistakable gravity of a veiled threat. The tension in the room thickened with every syllable, the air growing heavier as she continued. Veronica, voice low, deliberate, dripping with quiet menace.
We need to work together. Otherwise, I can't guarantee Maxwell will keep his reputation or his power for much longer.
Her final words hit the air like a small but devastating bomb, reverberating in the silence that followed. Isabel didn't flinch. She remained seated, her posture resolute, her gaze locked onto Veronica's, as though willing herself to strip away the layers of deception that cloaked every word and action of the woman before her. Inside, anger simmered like a slow-burning fire, but Isabel refused to let it flare out of control. Her eyes, clear and resolute, conveyed a quiet yet formidable strength. They sent an unspoken message she would not be intimidated, no matter how carefully crafted the threat. The tension between the two women reached a breaking point, the charged air in the cozy cafe all but obliterating the soft jazz music playing from the old speaker in the corner. Every note seemed distant now, drowned out by the weight of Veronica's words and the sheer force of will radiating from Isabel. The air between them was taut with unspoken challenges, and in the cafe's confined space, the soft jazz from the old speaker seemed to fade into the background, swallowed by the looming shadow of Veronica's veiled ultimatum. Isabel leaned forward slightly, her movements deliberate yet commanding, as though to assert control over the space and lend weight to every word she spoke. Her sharp, unwavering gaze locked onto Veronica, piercing through the polished facade of the woman sitting across from her. Isabel, her voice firm, measured but brimming with restrained urgency.
You really think I'll trust you? It's clear you and Maxwell are keeping something from me. But let me make this clear. I won't be intimidated, Veronica.
Veronica responded with a faint, almost indifferent smile, the corners of her lips curling in a way that exuded quiet confidence. Her hand moved leisurely to the rim of her coffee cup, the motion unhurried and deliberate, as though she were intentionally stretching out the moment. Her sharp eyes glimmered with amusement, as if she were savoring the tension in the air like a delicacy. She didn't reply immediately, allowing the oppressive silence between them to linger for a few more seconds. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft yet icy, each word weighted with meticulous calculation. Veronica.
Trust? No, Isabel. I don't need you to trust me. Whether you believe me or not changes nothing.
Her eyes, cold and penetrating, bored into Isabel, emphasizing the gravity of what she was about to say next. Veronica, her voice lowering, each word carrying an unmistakable threat.
I only need you to understand that refusing to cooperate won't be an easy path. It won't help you, Maxwell, or anyone else involved.
Isabel's lips pressed into a tight line, her gaze unwavering despite the rising tension. Though her hands clenched into fists on the table, she released them quickly, regaining control. When she responded, her voice was steady, every word delivered with deliberate precision. Isabel through clenched teeth, her tone carefully controlled.
Then what do you want from me? Stop circling around, Veronica. Get to the point.
Veronica lifted her cup and sipped her coffee slowly, her deliberate actions drawing out the silence like a blade. When she set the cup back down, the soft clink echoed between them, a subtle assertion of her dominance in the moment. Leaning forward, Veronica's smile sharpened into a thin, razor-edged smirk. Veronica.
I'm not circling around anything, Isabel. I'm telling you the truth. Ryan, he left behind things that are dangerous. Not everyone dared to touch them, but now, they're in your hands.
She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in before continuing, her voice quiet yet cutting. Veronica.
And you know as well as I do that some secrets are best left buried. Not everyone wants them brought to light, Isabel.
Isabel's expression remained firm, but the fire in her eyes grew fiercer. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm but carried an undeniable edge of defiance. Isabel, her tone challenging.
So, what's your plan? To use those secrets to threaten me or Maxwell? If you think I'll let that happen, you're gravely mistaken.
Veronica let out a soft, mocking laugh, the sound light yet laced with a chilling confidence. Veronica.
Threaten? No, Isabel. I don't need to threaten you. I'm simply reminding you that working with me will be much easier, especially for Maxwell.
Isabel, her voice cold as steel.
Maxwell isn't part of this. This is between you and me.
Veronica tilted her head slightly, her gaze sparkling with a mix of mockery and provocation. Veronica.
Oh, is that so? Are you sure about that? Maxwell's always trying to protect you, but do you really know what he's hiding?
Anger flickered in Isabel's eyes, but she maintained her composure. Her reply came in a measured tone, her voice steady and unyielding. Isabel.
If he's hiding something, I'll find out myself. And if you think you can manipulate me, I'll prove just how wrong you are.
Rising from her seat, Isabel pushed the chair back with a soft scrape against the wooden floor. Her piercing gaze never left Veronica, carrying a clear message she would not back down. Isabel, her voice resolute, each word a declaration.
I'm not a pawn in your game, Veronica. I'll uncover the truth myself, and you won't stop me.
Veronica leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. Her smile remained fixed, an expression of calm amusement that hinted at something darker beneath the surface. Veronica.
How fascinating. I'll look forward to seeing what you can do, Isabel. But remember, time isn't on your side.
Without another word, Isabel turned and walked away, the sound of her heels striking the wooden floor echoing in the quiet cafe. Each step radiated determination, her figure exuding an unshakable resolve. Behind her, Veronica remained seated, her sharp eyes following Isabel's retreating form. The smile on her lips never wavered, imbued with both challenge and calculation. Veronica murmuring to herself,
Do your best, Isabel. The game has only just begun. Veronica sat motionless, her smile lingering like an indelible mark, as if she had already anticipated every move and was waiting to see how Isabel would respond.
Isabel stepped into the apartment, gently closing the door behind her. The space was unusually quiet, illuminated only by the soft glow of a table lamp on the dining table, casting warm light onto the neutral-colored walls. The stillness was almost palpable, yet Isabel felt a heavy, invisible weight pressing down on the room. Maxwell sat at the dining table, his posture thoughtful and still. He wore a rolled-up shirt, faint creases visible near his wrists. In front of him, his laptop screen glowed, but his hands rested motionless on the keyboard, as if he'd paused mid-thought, unable to proceed. Under the amber light, his face betrayed a mix of weariness and deep contemplation, as though trapped in a spiral of endless, unresolved thoughts. Isabel stood frozen by the door, her eyes fixed on Maxwell. She didn't step further into the room, watching him from afar, as if searching his familiar figure for answers to the questions that had taken root in her mind. But Maxwell's expression remained a silent barrier, revealing nothing beyond his own inner turmoil. She let out a quiet sigh, reaching up to hang her trench coat on the rack near the door. Her movements were slow, almost deliberate, as if prolonging the moment would give her time to steady herself before fully entering the space they now shared. Without a word, Isabel moved toward the kitchen. Her footsteps were soft against the wooden floor, blending seamlessly into the room's quiet. Standing by the counter, she began preparing a cup of tea, her eyes drifting repeatedly toward Maxwell.
You're back. Must have been a long night. You must be tired.
Her gaze carried a weight of scrutiny and conflicting emotions. Inside, Isabel felt the storm of a growing contradiction. Part of her longed to trust Maxwell, to dismiss Veronica's words as nothing more than calculated attempts to drive a wedge between them. But another part, stronger, louder, refused to silence the doubts that were rapidly taking hold of her. Her fingers tightened around the warm mug as she finished making the tea, seeking comfort in the small act. Finally, she stepped out of the kitchen, placing the cup down on the table across from Maxwell. Maxwell looked up, his eyes meeting hers. A faint smile crossed his lips, an effort to dispel the tension that lingered in the air. Maxwell, his tone gentle, attempting to ease the strain. Isabel didn't respond immediately. Her lips curved into a faint, forced smile, but her eyes, though locked on Maxwell's, betrayed the shadow of her doubts. When Maxwell looked up and gave her a small, reassuring smile, Isabel responded with a reluctant one of her own, her gaze clouded with the unresolved question she could no longer ignore. Isabel slowly lifted the teacup in her hands, feeling the soothing warmth seep through her palms, but even its comforting heat couldn't dispel the heaviness clouding her mind. She stood still for a moment, as if gathering her composure before making a move. Finally, she took slow, deliberate steps toward the dining table, her soft footsteps blending seamlessly into the silence of the room. Pulling out a chair, Isabel sat across from Maxwell, her gaze gentle, as if she were merely attempting to initiate a casual conversation. Yet buried within her steady eyes was an unmistakable scrutiny, a quiet but deliberate tension that she left hanging in the air for Maxwell to feel. Isabel lightly, her tone attempting a casual ease.
How was your day?
Maxwell, his head still bowed toward his laptop screen, glanced up briefly at her question. A faint smile appeared on his lips, but the thoughtful shadow in his eyes remained, refusing to dissipate. Maxwell calmly, maintaining an even tone.
Nothing out of the ordinary. A few important meetings, some paperwork to sign, and a couple of work issues to handle. Just the usual.
The words came easily, but his fingers began tapping softly on the table, a repetitive rhythm that seemed to fill the expanding silence between them. Yet the small gesture didn't escape Isabel's sharp attention. She noted every detail, every subtle movement. She tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful, as if searching for something hidden behind Maxwell's composed demeanor. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, unrelenting, as if attempting to see through the calm mask he wore. Isabel continuing, her tone soft but probing.
The usual? Nothing weighing on your mind? You seem more tense than usual.
Maxwell paused, his tapping fingers freezing mid-motion. His eyes flicked to Isabel's face, only to dart away again as he shook his head. Folding his hands together, he rested them on the table, as though trying to suppress the unconscious habit she had just pointed out. Maxwell, his voice low, almost a whisper.
No, nothing. It's been a long day. I think I just need some rest.
Isabel nodded slightly, her lips pressing into a thin line. Maxwell's response was reasonable, but it did little to alleviate the doubt curling in the corners of her mind. She said nothing further, lowering her gaze to the tea in her hands. As she sipped quietly, her eyes remained on Maxwell through the edge of her vision, studying his every move. Maxwell, sensing her watchful gaze, quickly returned his focus to the laptop. His fingers moved across the keyboard, but his typing was slower, hesitant, as though his mind were elsewhere, tangled in thoughts he couldn't bring himself to share. The silence between them grew heavier, stifling yet unbroken. Only the steady ticking of the wall clock echoed faintly through the room, its relentless rhythm emphasizing the weight of the unspoken tension. Isabel sat quietly, her hands wrapped around the teacup, letting its warmth seep into her cold fingers. She looked up at Maxwell once more, but when it became clear that he wouldn't say anything further, her gaze shifted toward the large window beside the table. Outside, the city was blanketed in darkness. Distant golden lights from tall buildings flickered weakly against the night, their glow faint and solitary, like fragile candles flickering in a cold wind. The darkness beyond the glass felt impenetrable, much like the secrets Isabel knew were still hidden from her truths she needed to uncover, answers to the growing doubts in her heart. The steady ticking of the clock filled the room, but for Isabel, time seemed to have stopped. Every passing second stretched endlessly, amplifying the uncertainty in her mind and the questions that refused to be silenced. The soft light from the desk lamp continued to illuminate the quiet room, but its glow offered no solace to Isabel. As the minutes dragged on and the darkness outside crept closer, the doubts within her grew stronger, more insistent. Isabel knew she couldn't let this continue. She lifted her head, her eyes hardening with determination. Whatever the cost, she would face the truth she deserved to know. The light from the desk lamp in the corner of the room cast a feeble glow, illuminating only a small section of the apartment. Its faint golden hue created scattered shadows on the walls and ceiling, the interplay of light and darkness reflecting the turbulence in the air between Isabel and Maxwell. The large window nearby was slightly ajar, allowing the cool night breeze to slip through. The sheer cream-colored curtains swayed gently with each gust, producing a soft, persistent rustling that underscored the near absolute silence of the room. The only other sound was the steady ticking of the wall clock, each tick a subtle reminder of the oppressive tension hanging over them. Isabel sat on the edge of the sofa, her posture stiff and uneasy. Her hands were clasped together on her knees, but her sharp, piercing gaze never left Maxwell. She watched him intently, as if searching for answers in the conflicted expression etched across his face. Maxwell stood near the dining table, his shadow stretching long under the dim light. His stance was upright, but not at ease, as though the weight of the secrets he carried was slowly breaking him. His shoulders sagged slightly, and while he tried to avoid Isabel's unwavering gaze, he couldn't completely escape the determination in her eyes. The air between them was suffocating, thick with unspoken words. It felt as though both were waiting for someone to speak, for something to finally shatter the silence pressing down on the room. Maxwell stood silently, his eyes fixed on the dark wooden floor, the grain patterns resembling a maze of paths in his mind where he was desperately searching for an escape. His shoulders sagged, burdened by the weight of secrets pressing against his chest. A heavy sigh escaped him, carrying the exhaustion and helplessness he could no longer contain. Maxwell slowly, his voice heavy.
"All right, you deserve the truth."
Isabel sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands gripping the fabric so tightly her knuckles turned white, her nails digging into the soft upholstery. Her gaze remained locked on Maxwell, unrelenting, as emotions stormed within her: anger, worry, and a deep-seated fear that his confession would confirm her darkest suspicions. Isabel low but resolute.
"Say it. I want to hear everything. No more lies, Maxwell."
Maxwell drew in a deep breath, his eyes flickering toward Isabel for a brief moment before darting away, as though he couldn't summon the courage to meet her piercing stare. Maxwell, his voice deep, each word a burden.
"I helped Ryan. At first, I thought it was just a small art smuggling operation. Nothing serious. Paintings, a few sculptures. I didn't even think it was illegal, but I was wrong."
He paused, his hands trembling slightly as he clenched them at his sides in an effort to steady himself. Maxwell.
"It didn't stop there. What I thought was small and harmless turned into something much bigger, something dangerous. It's been out of my control for a long time."
His words hit Isabel like sharp daggers. Her chest tightened, each breath becoming harder to draw as the weight of his admission bore down on her. Isabel, her voice shaking, filled with pain.
"How long have you known? How long have you kept this from me? Why, Maxwell? Why didn't you tell me?"
Maxwell stepped back as if her words had struck him, a blow he couldn't deflect. He reached for the glass of water on the table, his long fingers gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned pale. Maxwell softly, almost a whisper.
"I didn't know how to tell you. From the start, I thought I could handle everything on my own. I believed that if I did the right thing, it would all go away, and you wouldn't have to be involved."
Isabel let out a bitter, humorless laugh, a sound sharp and cutting. Isabel coldly.
"Not involved? Maxwell, do you really think I wasn't affected by this? Do you truly believe you could keep me in the dark and control everything without consequences?"
Maxwell lowered his head, avoiding her eyes. Her words were like arrows, hitting every vulnerable spot in him. Maxwell, his voice deep, laced with regret.
"I didn't want to drag you into this mess. I thought protecting you meant keeping you out of it. But now I see I was wrong."
Isabel stood abruptly, the sharp sound of the sofa scraping against the floor breaking the oppressive silence. She stared directly at Maxwell, her eyes blazing with a mix of fury and anguish. "Isabel."
"Yes, you were wrong, Maxwell. You were wrong to think I couldn't help you. Wrong to believe that hiding the truth was the only way to protect me."
She stepped closer, her voice dropping but growing sharper with every word. "Isabel."
"I'm not an outsider in your life, Maxwell. You don't get to decide what I should or shouldn't know. That's not how a relationship works."
Maxwell looked up, his eyes filled with remorse, his voice trembling slightly. "Maxwell."
"I know, Isabel, I know. I just didn't want to lose you."
A heavy silence settled over the room, broken only by the steady ticking of the wall clock. Isabel stared at Maxwell, her heart a tangle of conflicting emotions, but she said nothing more. Maxwell's confession hung in the air, leaving Isabel's gaze clouded with profound disappointment, as though the distance between them had grown into an unbridgeable chasm. Isabel shot up from the sofa, her movements abrupt and filled with a determination that seemed fueled by the weight of emotion she could no longer bear. Her feet carried her toward the window, but she stopped midway, as though afraid that going further might cause everything inside her to shatter uncontrollably. Her hand rose to her temple, fingers pressing lightly against her skin, a reflexive gesture as the mounting tension in her head began to take its toll. For a brief moment, her eyes turned toward the window. The faint glow of streetlights reflected off the glass, casting her slender silhouette against the wall. Yet Isabel wasn't truly looking outside. Her gaze was vacant, as though staring straight into the chaos swirling within her. Isabel, her voice trembling, filled with disappointment but steady.
You say you love me, Maxwell, but why? Why do you keep pushing me away? Do you even realize what it feels like when you shut me out of everything? You make me feel like I don't matter, like I'm not important enough. Do you know that sometimes I feel like I'm in love with a stranger? A man I thought I understood, but in the end, I don't know at all.
Her voice wasn't loud, but the weight of her words seemed to press down on the already stifling air in the room. Each syllable hung between them, sharp and unrelenting, cutting through the silence like a blade. Maxwell didn't respond immediately. He stood frozen, his eyes lowered, fixed on the floorboards as though the grain might hold the answers he sought. After a moment, he shifted, taking a single step forward, but the movement was heavy, burdened by the guilt he carried. Maxwell softly, his tone laden with remorse.
Isabel, I don't know where to begin. All I know is that I never wanted you to get hurt. I thought if I kept you out of this mess, I could protect you. But now I see I was wrong, completely wrong.
Isabel remained with her back to him, her body trembling slightly under the weight of emotions threatening to erupt. She let his words hang in the air, allowing them to settle before finally turning around to face him. When she did, her eyes were red, glistening with unshed tears that clung stubbornly to her lashes. Yet not a single drop fell. They were held back by a wall of cold resolve, a fragile yet formidable barrier she had built to shield herself. Isabel, her voice cold but laced with pain.
You're right, Maxwell. You were wrong. Wrong to think that hiding things from me was the way to protect me. Don't you see? I don't need someone to shield me by shutting me out. I need someone to stand beside me, someone who trusts me enough to let me into their world no matter how hard it is. But you didn't do that. You made the choice for me. And now, I'm not sure I can keep doing this.
She paused, taking a deep, steadying breath, as if trying to hold herself together. Isabel firmly, though her voice remained quiet.
I need time, Maxwell. I need to think, and maybe you should too.
Her words fell like a stone into the silence, sending ripples of unease through the room. The air between them seemed to freeze, the ticking of the clock the only sound breaking the oppressive quiet. Maxwell lifted his head, his eyes filled with anguish and desperation. Maxwell pleading, his voice raw.
Isabel, please don't go. We can talk about this. We can figure it out together.
But Isabel shook her head, her lips pressed into a firm line, signaling that her decision was final. Isabel soft but resolute.
Not now, Maxwell. Not when everything is still a mess.
She turned away, her steps measured and deliberate as she walked away from him. The sound of her heels against the wooden floor echoed in the stillness, each step cutting deeper into the silence that enveloped the room. Maxwell remained rooted in place, as if the weight of Isabel's final words had rendered him immobile. He watched her leave, his eyes filled with helplessness and a pain too deep for words. Maxwell stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the space where Isabel had been. In the dim light of the room, the shadows seemed to grow larger, consuming him along with the emotions he couldn't put into words. Isabel stepped into the study, her movements deliberate, the silence in her wake speaking volumes she didn't need to articulate. When the wooden door closed softly behind her, the sound echoed through the apartment, sealing her off from the outside world. The soft amber glow of the desk lamp illuminated a small corner of the room, carving out a modest island of light amidst the darkness that enveloped the rest of the space. She stood still for a few moments, her eyes scanning the familiar room, as if searching for a fragment of calm. Then, with quiet resolve, Isabel approached the desk, pulling out the chair and sitting down. The surface, usually neat and orderly, was now strewn with papers related to the forgotten light painting, their disarray mirroring the turmoil within her. Her fingers, cold from the weight of suppressed emotions, brushed lightly over the folder's cover. Her gaze lingered on the bold printed title, a flicker of determination mingling with defiance in her eyes. Isabel whispering, her voice resolute.
"If you won't share the truth, I'll find it myself."
She opened the folder, the soft rustle of pages filling the stillness as her hands moved with a blend of care and purpose. The lamp's light fell across Isabel's face, highlighting the sharp contours of her features and the depth of her focused expression, as though she were delving into the hidden secrets etched into every line of text. The world around her seemed to fade into stillness. The rhythmic turning of pages and the absent-minded tapping of her pen against the desk created a lone melody within the quiet room. Photographs, descriptions, and faint signatures surfaced before her, each detail fueling the growing resolve in her heart. In her mind, fragmented thoughts began to connect, forming a clearer picture of the events that had unfolded. She paused on a smudged note, her sharp eyes catching an inconsistency. Her grip on the pen tightened as the realization settled over her. She tapped the pencil against the desk in a steady cadence, each sound reinforcing her unshakable determination. Beyond the closed door of the study, the rest of the apartment remained steeped in shadow, an unyielding blanket of darkness. On the sofa, Maxwell sat motionless, his back leaning faintly against the cushions, his shoulders heavy with unseen burdens. His hand held a glass of water, but he made no move to lift it to his lips. His fingers gripped the rim tightly, knuckles white with tension, as though loosening his grasp might cause everything to crumble. Maxwell's eyes, hollow and distant, rested on the door to the study. Though he couldn't see Isabel, he could feel the growing chasm between them, a silent, unbridgeable gulf. In the oppressive stillness, his shallow breaths wavered, each one a battle against the turmoil roiling within him, as he searched for a way to salvage the relationship he knew was teetering on the brink of collapse. In the consuming darkness of the apartment, Maxwell sat alone, his gaze fixed on the closed door of the study, waiting for a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos he had unwittingly created. The room was steeped in silence, the ticking of the clock amplifying the suffocating tension between two people who had once been close but were now separated by a wall of secrets. Maxwell sat with his head bowed, his hands gripping the glass of water tightly, while behind the closed door of the study, Isabel's cold gaze was fixed on the documents before her. Yet her resolve did not stop there. The next morning, Isabel left the apartment, her steps slow but deliberate, as if following a path only she knew. Her destination was a place she never thought she would return to, the old house that had once been a haven for her and Ryan, now reduced to a shadow of its former self, a graveyard of memories. As Isabel approached the house, she paused at the threshold, her eyes scanning the space. Dust blanketed every surface, and faint light filtered through cracked windows, casting a dim glow that only heightened the desolation. The ruinous state of the house mirrored the chaos she felt within, but Isabel knew that somewhere in this decay lay the truth, and she was determined to uncover it. The old house was tucked away on a quiet, forgotten street where few ventured. Overgrown trees lined the path, their dense canopies forming a canopy of shadow that allowed only slivers of weak sunlight to break through. The surroundings were eerily still, as though time had stopped long ago. The crunch of dry leaves under Isabel's feet mingled with the occasional, distant chirp of birds, adding to the air of mystery. She stopped in front of the rusted iron gate, her hand brushing lightly against its surface. A sharp creak pierced the stillness as she pushed the gate open, disturbing the eerie calm that enveloped the place. Her eyes fixed on the house ahead, a structure that had once been her home with Ryan, now a hollow shell, its walls bearing the marks of time and neglect. The front door was ajar, its rusted hinges groaning as Isabel nudged it open. The stale scent of mildew hit her, making her wrinkle her nose. The wooden floor groaned weakly beneath her steps, every creak echoing through the quiet, as though the house itself was watching her intrude. Inside, faint light from the cracked windows struggled to illuminate the space, casting uneven streaks across the dust-covered floor. Old furniture still lingered, untouched but forgotten, cloaked in thick layers of dust that spoke of years of abandonment. A small table sat in the corner, cluttered with aged books and scattered papers, remnants of a life abruptly left behind. Isabel's brown coat clung to her frame, its collar raised against the chill that seeped through the cracks of the decrepit walls. In her hand, she held a small flashlight, its beam slicing through the dimness, revealing faded details in the shadows. Her deep-set eyes, alert and searching, swept across the room. Despite the overwhelming sense of desolation and cold, her gaze held firm with unwavering determination, ready to confront whatever lay hidden in this forsaken place. She approached the table, her fingers delicately brushing away the thick dust to reveal yellowed scraps of paper beneath. Her hand rested on an old envelope, its edges frayed and worn with age. Tilting her head, Isabel scrutinized the faded words printed on its surface, her focus intensifying. The stillness in the house was so profound that Isabel could hear each measured breath she took. Yet the silence carried an unspoken weight, as though it concealed an invisible threat, a secret waiting to be unearthed. The air inside the house was heavy with silence, but for Isabel it felt alive with an ominous tension, as if the truth she sought was just beyond reach, waiting to emerge. Isabel slowly lifted the old wooden box resting on the desk, its rusted hinges letting out a long, grating creak that echoed unnervingly in the silent room. Inside lay a few crumpled documents haphazardly arranged alongside a worn leather-bound journal, its edges frayed with age. Isabel reached out, carefully lifting the journal, as though any sudden movement might cause it to disintegrate in her hands. A flicker of hope lit up her eyes as they scanned the handwritten lines on the first page. Isabel whispering, almost inaudibly,
"Ryan, what did you leave behind here?"
She flipped through several pages, noticing annotations, names, and peculiar numbers scribbled throughout. Her breath caught when a familiar name leapt out at her: Veronica. Isabel froze, her heart skipping a beat. Isabel to herself, her voice taut.
"Veronica? She's involved in this too?"
She leaned closer to the flashlight's beam, straining to decipher every line of text. Just then, a faint noise broke the stillness, a creak, soft but distinct, like a floorboard yielding beneath a weight. Isabel froze, her fingers halting mid-turn of the page. She spun around, flashlight aimed toward the darkened corner of the room. The beam swept across peeling paint and dust-covered furniture, illuminating nothing but shadows that flickered and danced under the moving light. Isabel speaking louder, her voice trembling.
"Who's there? Show yourself."
She held the flashlight steady in front of her, attempting to control the panic tightening her chest. No answer came. Only the oppressive silence pressed in on her, so thick she could hear the erratic rhythm of her own heartbeat. Turning back to the desk, Isabel gripped the journal tightly, as if afraid it might vanish. But before she could act, a figure emerged from the shadows behind her, moving with alarming speed. She barely managed a short scream before a rough hand clamped over her mouth, cutting off her cry. Isabel struggled violently, her eyes wide with terror as the intruder's overwhelming force pinned her down. She was shoved hard to the floor, the impact sending a sharp pain up her back. The journal flew from her grasp, skidding across the dusty floor and coming to rest just out of reach. Isabel muffled, screaming through the hand covering her mouth.
"Let me go, someone! Help me!"
The assailant said nothing, their grip tightening as they fought to subdue her. Desperately, Isabel fumbled with her free hand in her coat pocket, blindly pressing buttons on her phone. A shrill ring pierced the room, shattering the tense silence. Isabel screaming, her voice breaking.
"Maxwell? Hear me! Help me!"
From the other end of the call, Maxwell's voice burst through the speaker, filled with panic. "Maxwell."
Isabel, what's going on? Where are you?
Before Isabel could respond, the intruder ripped the phone from her grasp and hurled it across the room. The phone hit the floor with a resounding crack, bouncing once before the screen flickered and went dark. Maxwell threw the phone's weak speaker, his voice frantic.
Isabel, answer me, Isabel.
She tried to scream again, but the hand over her mouth muffled her cries. The assailant yanked her toward the door, their heavy steps causing the creaking floorboards to groan in protest. Isabel thrashed against them, her nails digging into the flesh of their arm, but her resistance only seemed to fuel their aggression. As she was dragged away, Isabel's eyes locked onto the journal, lying abandoned in the middle of the floor. The flashlight, discarded nearby, cast its beam directly onto the journal, illuminating the words she hadn't yet read. The shattered phone lay lifeless on the ground, its screen fading to black, while Maxwell's desperate voice continued to echo faintly through the speaker. Maxwell.
Isabel, where are you? Answer me.
But the room offered no reply, only silence, shadows, and the lingering dread of Isabel's disappearance into the night. Maxwell sat in the dimly lit office, the faint glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across his face, highlighting the deep tension etched into his features. Before him, his phone lay still on the table, its dark screen a silent reminder of the passing time and the absence of any word from Isabel. His eyes remained fixed on it, as though sheer willpower could make it come to life with the news he so desperately needed. He exhaled heavily, each breath uneven and labored, while his foot tapped rhythmically against the wooden floor, an unconscious attempt to calm the storm raging in his mind. Isabel's terrified screams from the interrupted phone call echoed endlessly in his thoughts. She had called him, but the line had been cut too soon, leaving him with nothing but a hollow sense of dread. Maxwell muttering hoarsely, barely a whisper.
Isabella, why? Where are you? Please just call back. Please.
He lowered his head, gripping his knees tightly, as though trying to summon strength from within. Suddenly, the phone rang, shattering the suffocating silence. Maxwell jolted upright, his heart leaping with a mix of hope and fear. In one swift motion, he snatched the phone off the table, not even bothering to check the caller ID. His trembling hands clutched it tightly as he brought it to his ear, his voice breaking with urgency. Maxwell hurried, voice trembling.
Isabel? Is that you? Isabel, answer me.
On the other end of the line, there was only heavy, uneven breathing, a strange, unnatural sound that sent a shiver down Maxwell's spine. A second passed, then another. Maxwell's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles whitening as his breathing grew faster to match the tension. Maxwell shouting, voice thick with desperation.
Who is this? Isabel, say something. Where are you?
The response came abruptly, not from Isabel, but from a deep, chilling male voice that seemed to echo from a distant, shadowy place. Though the words were indistinct, the menace in the tone was unmistakable. And then, just as suddenly as it began, the call ended. The screen flashed.
Call ended.
Its stark letters striking Maxwell like a blow. He stared at the phone in disbelief, his hands slick with sweat. His mind raced with chaotic thoughts, but amidst the whirlwind of confusion, one truth became clear: he couldn't wait any longer. Maxwell swiftly dialed emergency services, his voice shaking but filled with determination. Maxwell, to the operator, hurried but trying to stay composed.
I need to report a kidnapping. Her name is Isabel. She called me earlier, and there were disturbing sounds on the line. She's in danger.
Operator, calm but firm.
Do you have any information on her location? We need more details to proceed.
Maxwell hesitating for a brief moment before responding decisively.
The old house on 15 Cedar Lane. That's the only place that makes sense. Please, you need to move fast. I'm not sure how much time she has.
Operator.
We've logged the report. A team will be dispatched immediately. Stay where you are so we can contact you for further details if needed.
But Maxwell wasn't about to stay put. He ended the call abruptly, ignoring the operator's parting words, and grabbed his coat from the nearby hook. Isabel's panicked voice, her cries for help, played on a loop in his mind, fueling the fire of urgency that consumed him. Maxwell murmuring to himself, a vow.
"I'll find you, Isabel. Hold on."
He bolted out of the apartment, his footsteps echoing sharply down the empty hallway. The stark fluorescent lights overhead cast fleeting reflections on his face, no longer marked by hesitation, but by raw determination and simmering rage. Outside, the city lay shrouded in darkness, but Maxwell refused to let the night slow him down. He raced toward Cedar Lane, driven by an unrelenting resolve to find Isabel before it was too late, no matter the cost. The roads leading to Cedar Lane seemed to stretch endlessly under the dim glow of the streetlights, but Maxwell refused to slow down. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his gaze fixed straight ahead, where a fragile hope that Isabel was still safe fueled the pounding rhythm of his heart. As he crossed the final intersection, a chilling thought flickered through his mind: what if it wasn't Cedar Lane? But that fear didn't have time to take root. The phone rang sharply in the car, the screen flashing an unfamiliar number. Maxwell snatched it up hastily, only to be met with an eerie soundscape, the howling of wind and the crash of distant waves, overlaid with a voice that was low and cold. The voice.
"Cedar Lane is the wrong path, Maxwell. If you want to save her, head to the old harbor."
The call ended abruptly with a sharp click, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Maxwell clenched his teeth. Without hesitation, he spun the car around and sped toward the harbor, a place where dim lights and the rhythmic crash of waves promised the nightmare that awaited him. Meanwhile, in an abandoned warehouse near the harbor, Isabel sat huddled on the cold concrete floor. The dim glow of swaying light bulbs cast shadows across her weary face as the wind howled through the cracks in the walls, like a ghostly warning. The decrepit warehouse stood isolated by the water, surrounded by rusted metal shipping containers and rotting piles of timber stacked haphazardly. Chipped paint peeled away from the exterior walls, exposing corroded steel beneath that bore the scars of time. The sound of waves lapping against the shore blended with the eerie whistle of the wind, creating an atmosphere so chilling it felt as though the place had been forgotten for decades. Inside, the gloom deepened. Pale, cold blue light from the dangling bulbs illuminated every dark corner, swaying gently in the draft and making the shadows on the walls seem to move. The concrete walls, damp and speckled with mold, reflected the light in a dreary haze, evoking a sense of danger and foreboding. In the center of the room, Isabel was bound tightly to a wooden chair, her wrists raw and aching from the coarse rope that cut into her skin. Her hair was disheveled, but her face betrayed no fear. Her sharp eyes glinted with unyielding determination, even as sweat trickled down her temples and her labored breaths hinted at her exhaustion. She gritted her teeth, her gaze darting around the room in search of any weakness, any chance to escape. The suffocating silence was broken only by the faint creak of the swaying light fixtures and the slow drip of water leaking from holes in the roof. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed from outside, reverberating off the concrete walls and shattering the oppressive stillness. Isabel lifted her head slightly, her eyes flashing with a glimmer of hope. The footsteps drew closer, each one resonating louder, and Isabel held her breath, channeling every ounce of her strength and resolve into the confrontation that was about to unfold. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed outside the warehouse, tearing through the oppressive silence that hung over everything like a heavy shroud. The rusty metal door was shoved open with a piercing screech, its noise reverberating throughout the vast, shadowy space. Maxwell, leading a fully armed police team, stormed inside, his eyes sharp with cold determination and burning with the weight of his worry for Isabel. His long coat billowed with each urgent step, every movement carrying the weight of his desperation. Bright beams from the flashlights mounted on the officers' weapons swept across the dim interior, illuminating the stained concrete walls, decrepit crates, and dusty floor. The light seemed determined to strip away every secret hiding in the darkness. Suddenly, one of the beams froze at the center of the room, locking onto Isabel, bound to an old wooden chair. Her hair was disheveled, her head bowed, but her eyes betrayed a mix of surprise and relief when she saw Maxwell.
Isabel?
Maxwell shouted, his voice ringing with both anguish and urgency, as if it could bridge the gap between them. Without hesitation, he rushed to her side, dropping to his knees as he reached her. His hands trembled slightly as he worked to untie the harsh ropes biting into her wrists.
You came?
Isabel murmured, her voice breaking. It was part exclamation, part reproach, as tears streaked down her cheeks. Maxwell looked up, his gaze steady but his tone resolute.
I'm getting you out of here. Trust me, no one's going to hurt you again.
While Maxwell focused on freeing Isabel, the police team fanned out, their boots thudding against the rotting wooden floorboards and echoing through the cavernous space. Flashlight beams swept over crates and walls, their movements casting jittery shadows that seemed to tremble in the tense atmosphere. Each second stretched taut, like a string ready to snap. Isabel's lips quivered as she whispered,
Maxwell, they're still here. I heard them whispering in the dark.
Maxwell's jaw tightened, and he squeezed her shoulder gently, a silent reassurance, even as he felt the prickling unease of unseen danger.
Don't be afraid, Isabel. I'm here. Everything's going to be okay,
he said, though a slight tremor in his voice betrayed his own uncertainty. Suddenly, from the dark recesses at the far end of the room, a group of shadowy figures burst forth, moving with shocking speed. Shouts erupted as their footsteps pounded toward the center of the room.
Look out!
Maxwell yelled, stepping in front of Isabel and pushing her back toward a nearby stack of crates. He spun to face the attackers, his body taut like a drawn bowstring ready to snap.
Stay down,
he barked, his voice brooking no argument. Isabel ducked behind the crates, clutching her raw, rope-marked wrists. Her body trembled, but her eyes stayed fixed on Maxwell, wide with both fear and unshakable trust. One of the attackers lunged at Maxwell, wielding a heavy iron rod. Maxwell dodged the first swing, but the second struck his shoulder with a sickening thud, forcing him back a step as pain rippled through him. He gritted his teeth and used every ounce of strength to shove his attacker away, even as the sharp ache radiated through his body.
Maxwell, watch out!
Isabel screamed, helpless as she watched him surrounded. Around them, chaos erupted. Officers shouted orders. Gunfire cracked sharply through the air, and the crash of splintering wood echoed as the fight spilled across the room. Flashlight beams flickered and darted, illuminating figures grappling and colliding in a frenzied melee. Maxwell glanced over his shoulder at Isabel, his eyes blazing with both worry and resolve.
Wait for me. Stay hidden. I'm not losing you.
The deafening roar of gunfire filled the warehouse as bursts of light from the flashlights illuminated the frantic movements of combatants. The cold, desolate warehouse transformed into a brutal battleground where danger lurked in every shadow and survival hung by a thread. As the chaos began to subside, the gunfire and shouts gradually faded into tense silence, broken only by the steady footsteps of the police echoing through the vast space. From deep within the shadows came another sound, the deliberate, measured click of high heels, cutting through the lingering air thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and dust. From a concealed corner at the far end of the warehouse, a familiar figure emerged, stepping into the flickering glow of a hanging light. Veronica, draped in a long black trench coat, moved with a calm, unshaken confidence tinged with defiance. The bluish-white light illuminated her face, highlighting her piercing gaze and the faint, arrogant curve of her lips. Veronica, her tone calm, her smile faint.
So touching, Maxwell. But did you really think you could hide forever? Your efforts tonight, impressive as they are, only prove one thing: I'm always right. You can't escape this game because, whether you like it or not, you're a part of it.
Leaning against a nearby crate after taking a brutal hit, Maxwell struggled to stand upright. His face hardened, a mixture of shock and fury as his eyes locked onto Veronica. Maxwell breathing heavily, his voice sharp.
Veronica, you're behind all of this? From the very beginning? How far did you go?
Veronica shrugged slightly, her cold eyes dismissing his question as unworthy of an answer. Instead, she turned her attention to Isabel, who leaned against another crate to steady herself. Though still shaken from her ordeal, Isabel clenched her fists, her eyes blazing with anger. Isabel firmly, with a hint of derision.
You did all this, hurt all these people, just to prove what, Veronica? That you're the one in control. If that's the case, it's just sad.
Veronica raised an eyebrow, her smile deepening as if Isabel's words were nothing more than an amusing jest. Veronica softly, with subtle menace.
Control, Isabel. I don't need control. Haven't you figured it out yet? I only want everyone to see the truth. That in this game, no one is innocent. Not Maxwell, not Ryan, and certainly not you.
She stepped closer to Isabel, her icy gaze dissecting every flicker of emotion on Isabel's face. Isabel, her tone sharp, challenging.
And what do you think you're doing, Veronica? Playing judge, or are you just a ruthless manipulator who doesn't know when to stop?
Veronica paused, a glimmer of intrigue flashing in her eyes, as though Isabel had struck precisely where she wanted. Veronica, her voice steady, her eyes probing.
Ruthless, perhaps. But Isabel, have you ever stopped to wonder who the real ruthless ones are? Ryan played with fire. Maxwell thinks he's the hero. And you, what have you done? Did you stand by and let it all happen, only to play the victim now?
Veronica's words cut through the air like knives, the weight of them pressing into the silence between the two women. Isabel took a step forward, her legs trembling but her resolve unshaken. Isabel coldly, her voice tinged with emotion.
I may not know everything that's happened, but I know one thing. I won't let you or anyone else manipulate me. You can play this game with Ryan and Maxwell, but not with...
Veronica chuckled softly, a sound light yet steeped in mockery. Veronica, with deliberate emphasis, stepping closer.
Are you sure, Isabel? Do you really think you can stand apart? But remember this, you stepped into the spiral the moment you chose to trust Maxwell. And now, perhaps you should ask yourself, is he even worth your trust?
Before Veronica could continue, heavy footsteps rang out from behind. A group of officers approached, their weapons raised and ready. Police chief in a commanding voice.
Veronica, you're under arrest. Hands behind your head. Now.
Veronica let out a faint, almost dismissive laugh, showing no sign of panic or resistance. Slowly, she raised her hands, her movements deliberate and composed. One of the officers stepped forward, swiftly snapping handcuffs around her wrists. Even as she was restrained, Veronica's gaze remained fixed on Isabel, her eyes still icy and unrelenting. Veronica softly, her voice laced with implication.
Remember what I said, Isabel? The truth isn't always pleasant. Good luck, if you dare to face it.
Isabel stood silently, offering no reply. Her eyes burned with both anger and determination as she watched Veronica being escorted away. Veronica walked off with her hands cuffed, yet the faint smile on her lips never faltered, as if she had foreseen everything and was already planning the next move in her elaborate game. Even with her hands bound, Veronica's confidence remained unshaken. She walked with slow, deliberate steps, her hands restrained behind her back, yet her long black trench coat still billowed with each measured stride. As she approached Maxwell and Isabel, she paused, her piercing gaze sweeping over them both. Her expression radiated contempt, an arrogant disdain etched in her eyes, as though determined to carve her words into their minds like an indelible scar. Veronica, with a faint, mocking smile.
Do you think you've won, Isabel? How naive. Maxwell will never escape the shadows of his family. Everything Ryan left behind, everything Maxwell has done, do you really think it can all just vanish? It will always be there, clinging to him like a ghost that won't let go.
Leaning against a crate to steady himself after the heavy blow he had taken, Maxwell clenched his jaw tightly. Pain throbbed in his shoulder, but the fury in his eyes burned brighter. He lifted his head, glaring at Veronica with seething anger. Maxwell breathing heavily, his voice sharp.
Veronica, you were behind all of this? From the very start? How far did you go? For what? To destroy me?
Veronica raised an eyebrow, her expression a blend of amusement and disdain. She shook her head slightly, as though Maxwell's question was nothing more than a trivial joke. Veronica with a cold shrug.
Destroy you? Oh, Maxwell, you've done that to yourself. I only brought the truth to light, the truth you tried so hard to bury. What do you think, Isabel? This man is no different from Ryan. Can you really place your trust in him, knowing what you know now?
Standing just a step away from Maxwell, Isabel glared at Veronica, her barely contained anger flashing in her eyes. Her fists tightened as she struggled to stay composed against the onslaught of Veronica's cutting remarks. Taking a step forward, Isabel positioned herself between Maxwell and Veronica, her gaze steady and unyielding. Isabel firmly, with a touch of derision.
How pathetic, Veronica. You've done all of this just to prove what? That you're in control. You think it makes you strong, but all I see is someone desperate to cling to power. Someone who's utterly pitiful.
Veronica narrowed her eyes, her lips curling into a faint smirk. She let the silence hang for a few moments, as though savoring the weight of what she was about to say. Veronica calmly, but laden with implication.
Control, Isabel? You misunderstand. I don't need control. I simply allow things to unfold as they must. And now there's only one thing left, to remind you both that sometimes the truth is the most merciless weapon of all. Ryan learned that. Maxwell is about to. And you, Isabel, are you sure you're strong enough to face it?
Isabel's gaze didn't falter, holding firm under the weight of Veronica's words. She stepped closer to Maxwell, reaching out to grasp his hand. Maxwell blinked in surprise, but then tightened his grip around her hand, as though finding solace in her presence amidst the storm of accusations. Isabel with conviction, her voice steady.
We'll face it together. The darkness can't stop us as long as we stand by each other. You won't win.
Maxwell looked down at Isabel, his hardened expression softening. A faint smile touched his lips, despite the pain still gnawing at his shoulder. Maxwell, his voice low, filled with gratitude.
Thank you, Isabel.
Veronica smirked, unperturbed. As the police began to lead her away, she turned back one last time, her gaze fixed on Isabel. Her eyes were sharp, yet there was an unreadable depth to them, something between challenge and warning. Veronica softly, as her parting words will see, Isabel, sometimes it's the ones you trust most who hurt you the worst. Remember that. The steady sound of Veronica's heels echoed against the rotting wooden floor as the police escorted her out of the warehouse. Maxwell and Isabel remained standing in the empty space, the flickering lights cutting through the darkness, illuminating a path ahead, one fraught with challenges, yet brimming with hope they were determined to face together. Maxwell and Isabel walked slowly out of the warehouse, their footsteps echoing steadily on the rotting wooden floor. The cold air of the harbor enveloped them, carrying the salty tang of the sea and the gentle sound of waves lapping against the rocky shore. In the distance, the lighthouse cast its glowing beam across the still night, sweeping in steady arcs, a symbol of emerging from darkness and finding hope. Isabel, still shaken by the events that had unfolded, turned to look at Maxwell. Her hair fluttered in the chilly breeze, but her eyes now shone with a newfound brightness, no longer filled with fear, but with resolve and trust. Isabel, her voice soft but resolute.
We won't let the past dictate our future. No matter how hard it gets, we'll overcome it, Maxwell.
Maxwell paused for a moment, his eyes fixed on Isabel. The lighthouse's glow reflected in his gaze, illuminating the weariness etched into his face, but also the deep gratitude within. He reached out and took Isabel's hand firmly, as though sealing an unspoken promise not just to her, but to himself as well. Maxwell nodding, his voice low and sincere.
I know, and I promise you won't have to face it alone anymore.
Isabel gently squeezed his hand, a faint smile playing on her lips. Together they turned their gaze toward the city in the distance, its skyline illuminated by glowing lights. The towering buildings stood resolute against the night, their radiance offering warmth and optimism, a reminder that the future still held countless possibilities for them to explore together. The harbor wind continued to blow, cold but no longer chilling. It carried with it no sense of isolation or fear. They walked on, side by side, each step a quiet affirmation that even the deepest darkness could not extinguish the light when they chose to stand together. In the cold harbor breeze, Maxwell and Isabel walked toward the light. Behind them, the decrepit warehouse faded into the shadows, closing the chapter of a stormy past. Ahead of them, the city rose like a promise of new beginnings. The expansive art gallery was awash in radiant light, each corner illuminated by exquisite crystal chandeliers that cast a warm glow over the displayed works of art. Visitors, dressed in elegant evening wear, tailored suits and shimmering gowns, moved gracefully through the space. All eyes seemed irresistibly drawn to the centerpiece of the room, where the forgotten light was on display. The focused brilliance of the spotlights brought the painting's intricate details and colors to life, imbuing it with an almost ethereal quality, at once mysterious and captivating. The soft hum of conversations blended with the delicate clink of wine glasses, underscored by the gentle strains of classical music emanating from a hidden corner of the room. The atmosphere was dignified and brimming with pride, as though everyone present could sense the profound significance of this exhibition. Isabel stood near the painting, radiant in a deep sapphire evening gown that hugged her form, highlighting her elegance and inner strength. Her eyes sparkled as she engaged in conversation with art critics and guests. Words of praise for the exhibition, for the forgotten light, and for Isabel's perseverance filled the air, touching her deeply.
The city welcomed them back with open arms, its streetlights illuminating a path toward a future where old wounds could begin to heal. Not long after, amidst the vibrant energy of an art exhibition, the forgotten light stood proudly under the brilliant glow of the gallery lights, a testament to resilience and rebirth from ruin.
An experienced art critic remarked, his eyes gleaming with admiration.
This painting is truly remarkable, Isabel.
Isabel smiled, her gaze briefly resting on the painting before she replied, her voice soft yet imbued with emotion.
You've brought to life not just art, but an entire story.
Amid the dazzling lights and a round of applause that echoed from the far end of the room, Isabel felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The hardships, the pain of the past, seemed to dissolve, leaving only pride and contentment. It was as if every challenge she had faced had been a necessary piece of the puzzle leading to this very moment.
Art has always been the best way to tell stories we can't express in words.
Maxwell stepped onto the small stage at the center of the gallery, where the glow of the crystal chandeliers cast an elegant light on his figure clad in a sharp black tuxedo. A microphone rested in his hand, but his eyes remained fixed on Isabel, standing a few steps away amid the respectful gaze of the crowd. Though he exuded sophistication, his expression carried an unmistakable weight of remorse and a deep, unspoken affection. Taking a deep breath, his warm, resonant voice broke the silence that had settled over the room.
Thank you all for being here today to witness the revival of a masterpiece. But I must say this evening is about more than the painting or the exhibition. It is a moment for me to express my gratitude and my most heartfelt apology.
His gaze slowly turned to Isabel, and in his eyes lay a story that words could never fully convey. His voice softened, but every word was heavy with emotion.
Isabel, the strong, extraordinary woman who has shown me that love is not always perfect, but you also taught me that it's always worth fighting for, worth overcoming every fear and every mistake.
The room was utterly still. every person captivated by his words. Maxwell bowed his head briefly, a gesture of sincere contrition, before setting the microphone down on the table beside him. He descended the stage, his steps deliberate, carrying him closer to Isabel. When he stood before her, he extended his hand, gently taking hers in a gesture that left the onlookers around them in quiet awe. His eyes locked onto Isabel's, his voice steady yet tender as it rang through the hushed room.
Love isn't always perfect, but you've shown me how to make it right. And I want to do that with you from this moment on.
Isabel looked at him, her eyes glistening with emotions too profound to put into words. A gentle smile broke across her lips, one that spoke of acceptance and an unspoken promise. Isabel, her voice soft, yet laden with meaning.
Then let's write the next chapter of our story, starting now.
Maxwell tightened his grip on her hand slightly, as if sealing his resolve. Around them, the room erupted into applause, the sound of cheers and laughter filling the space. In that moment, every gaze was fixed on the two of them, not just to celebrate the revival of the forgotten light, but to witness the rebirth of a love that had weathered its trials and emerged stronger. Isabel and Maxwell stood quietly beside one another amidst the radiant lights of the gallery, yet their minds seemed to drift far from the bustle surrounding them. Before them, the forgotten light glowed brilliantly under the spotlights, its intricate lines and vivid colors telling a story of struggle and rebirth. Isabel's gaze lingered on the painting, her eyes reflecting a glimmer of hope, as though she could see a new beginning waiting just beyond the horizon. Maxwell stood close beside her, his attention not solely on the painting but on Isabel herself, the woman who had always been his guiding light. After a long silence, Isabel turned to Maxwell. Her voice was soft, yet imbued with a certainty and determination that left no room for doubt.
We need to leave this place. Start fresh somewhere far from the shadows of the past.
Maxwell hesitated for only a moment before his eyes softened with understanding and quiet resolve. He nodded, his deep voice steady but brimming with emotion.
I'll go anywhere, as long as you're with me.
A faint smile graced Isabel's lips, one of gratitude and quiet promise. Maxwell gently took her hand, and together they turned and walked away from the gallery, leaving behind the murmured conversations and admiring glances of the crowd. As they stepped through the grand doors, the warm golden glow of the streetlights spilled over them, casting a soft light that seemed to wash away the remnants of the past. The fresh night air enveloped them, bringing a sense of freedom and calm unlike anything they had felt before. Walking side by side, their footsteps echoed softly in the quiet streets. Maxwell gave Isabel's hand a light squeeze, a silent reassurance of his presence and commitment. Isabel met his gaze with a tender smile, her eyes filled with trust and a newfound peace. A gentle laugh escaped between them, unbidden and without reason, born simply from the relief of having weathered the storm together. They moved forward under the warm glow of the streetlights, leaving the gallery and the painting behind, a symbol of their shared rebirth, now radiant with the light of hope. In the gallery bathed in radiant light, the forgotten light stood with quiet majesty at the center of the space, drawing every gaze to its brilliance. The focused illumination from the overhead lights cast a shimmering glow on every brushstroke, every shade of color, bringing the painting to life. Each hue intertwined to tell its own story, a story of revival from ruin, of light rediscovered in the deepest shadows of life. That light did not remain confined to the canvas, it radiated outward, filling the gallery like the first rays of dawn reaching into every hidden corner, illuminating every admiring face and every eye brimming with hope. The attendees, clad in elegant attire, seemed spellbound by the story the painting told, a story of forgiveness, love, and the enduring strength to overcome adversity. Soft classical music drifted through the air, each note blending seamlessly with the atmosphere, creating a sense of peace tinged with quiet emotion. Isabel and Maxwell stood together, their gazes fixed on the painting. Isabel reached out and lightly touched the frame, as if to fully absorb the resurrection woven into its colors. Maxwell rested a hand gently but firmly on her shoulder, his eyes reflecting a steadfast belief in the journey that lay ahead. The forgotten light was no longer just a piece of art, it had become a symbol. It carried with it the scars that had healed, the mistakes that had been mended, and the boundless hope for brighter tomorrows. The gallery, filled with brilliant lights and the soft murmur of laughter from distant corners, seemed to pause in that moment, a moment in which everyone present was not just admiring a painting, but also reflecting on their own lives. In the stillness, the forgotten light shone brighter, a luminous reminder that overcoming hardship is not merely about survival, but about living more fully with love, courage, and an unwavering faith in new beginnings. And just when you think the journey is over, new secrets await discovery. Stay tuned for more thrilling stories. Don't miss what's coming next.